Now, 630, obviously mountain bikes are not our specialty, but I can speak a little bit to what's the difference between a cheap mountain bike and what's the difference between an expensive mountain bike. And I would say number one, components. So when you look at a cheap electric bike and an expensive mountain bike, what's the difference? Well, the difference is the cheap electric bike's going to use cheaper everything. So there may be cheaper derailleur, a lot more plastic on the bike, less metal, cheaper metal, and other components, cheaper seats. And so a lot of times, when you look at a photo of a product, someone might say, these look the same to me. Well, that's probably true. So the difference really of these cheaper parts between expensive and cheap bikes is the durability and the performance. And on the more expensive bikes, more time goes into the design and the production of the components to ensure the quality. So what that does is it makes sure that that bike's going to perform. So when you're paying more money for an expensive mountain bike, you're essentially paying for the guarantee that this product is going to perform at the level that I want it to. Now, with that said, does that mean that all expensive bikes don't have any problems? Of course not. Some expensive mountain bikes will have problems, some cheap mountain bikes will have problems. But generally speaking, there's a lot more that goes into the design of the components on an expensive bike, and they are going to perform better than a cheap mountain bike. Another big thing that makes mountain bikes expensive is going to be the material they're made from. So you can get mountain bikes made from carbon, you can get mountain bikes made from aluminum. Cheaper mountain bikes, I would say, typically are going to be made from steel. So the cheapest mountain bike on the market is going to be a steel frame. It's going to be quite a bit heavier, harder to maneuver, more durable in terms of the strength of the frame, but probably, it's going to be worse performance, especially if you're a very aggressive rider. You want a light bike, something you can really maneuver. So on the more expensive side of mountain bikes, carbon is going to be the absolute most expensive frame material to use. Steel will be the cheapest, aluminum will be in between the two of those. Other things that make mountain bikes cheap is if they have a rear suspension or not. If they don't, it'll be cheaper than another bike that has a rear suspension. The front fork suspension, if it has it or doesn't have it, a cheaper mountain bike maybe doesn't have a front suspension fork. Although some of the cheaper mountain bikes have a rear suspension and a front suspension, but if they're in the $150, $200 range, I would be safe to say that those are not very high quality suspension systems, and the performance you're going to want out of those isn't going to be what you're going to get. So those are kind of the major differential. The bigger thing too, just like in every industry, is you're really paying for the design of the bike. The more expensive mountain bikes, a lot of hours went into testing that bike, designing that bike, choosing colors, choosing the look of the frame, the aerodynamics of it all. So there's a lot of things like that don't show up in a picture, that people don't know about, that the wind resistance might be less, the lightness of all the components are less. Cheap mountain bikes don't really pay attention to those kind of specifics. It's whatever parts work at the best price. Expensive mountain bikes, the parts are being chosen specifically to make sure performance is at the highest level. There's some great cost-effective alternatives to buying a cheap mountain bike. I would say the number one alternative is to buy a mountain bike used. And I say that because I myself and many people I know have bought and sold lots of different mountain bikes online. And especially in the mountain bike sector, where guys really like to buy new products yearly or every 2 years and sell their old products, you can get a really great deal on a very high-end mountain bike that might be the same price as buying a newer cheap mountain bike. So my suggestion is check places like Craigslist. Check places like Facebook Marketplace or Letgo. A lot of times you're going to see guys that have 10 mountain bikes in their garage, just want to get rid of a couple of them, and they're willing to get rid of some of their mountain bikes that maybe they've only used 1 or 2 times, and still give you a couple $100s off of what they paid for it. So you can get a really smoking deal, as opposed to going to Walmart and just buying a cheap bike for $150. Check out Craigslist, check out Letgo, Facebook Marketplace, ask some friends. Check out some of the cycling forums and ask people where I can find a good, lightly used mountain bike. Also, check with your local bike stores. They may have people turning in demos, or they might do buyback programs where they have old mountain bikes coming back to them that it's essentially like a refurbishment or a slightly used bike, and the discount you get and the value you get out of buying a bike like that is huge. I have indeed owned cheap mountain bikes. Growing up in the 80s and 90s, mountain bikes were really, really popular since, mountain bikes didn't really come about till that time. 70s, 80s is when they kind of really became a very important bike category. Growing up, I had a mountain bike from, at the time, I think it was Venture was an old department store. And for me at the time, it worked great. Why? Because I wasn't actually mountain biking with it. I was just riding it around my neighborhood probably once a week and not really doing much terrain riding. Now, with that said, I had another friend that actually bought a mountain bike from Walmart and tested it on some serious downhill mountain bike terrain. And long story short, the bike did not survive the whole way down. The handlebars cracked and some other things happened that were, really, really bad. Now, he was fine, but the bike didn't survive. So what I would suggest is that if you're going to be doing very intensive mountain biking, a cheap mountain bike is probably not the best option for you. However, if you just want to buy a mountain bike and ride it around the neighborhood or maybe on the grass a little bit, I think buying a cheap mountain bike is not a bad idea. From my experience, it worked out for me.